Sorry.
Okay. Whether we could be together or not. So we plan to have both these Zoom presentations, which are open to everyone and at no cost, and will also be on the Family Process website for the near future for teaching purposes or any other purpose, um, as well as a small in-person meeting, which will be in Washington, D.C. in September. And for those of you who have signed up for that meeting, just know that when we planned this, we planned it thinking that COVID would still be a danger. It's again more of a danger than we thought it was going to be 2 or 3 months ago. But we have an extremely large ballroom that can seat over 900 people, I believe. We're capping our participation list at 80, so there'll be plenty of space. And our gala dinner will be in a restaurant that has open windows on all sides. So I think we will also enforce the mask mandate for now, as far as we know, and most of the meals will be boxed and separated. So hopefully those of you who've signed up for that in-person celebration will feel safe coming. I just want to say a few words about how we ended up with this topic this year, which is not surprising to anyone. I think the board was very concerned about what was happening with COVID, and clearly many people on the board, many people involved with Family Process have for years been involved with concerns about systemic racism as well as health disparities. So the topic is not only timely, but it has legs. Many of the speakers have been working in this area for decades, if not their whole lifetime. I kind of want to introduce the speakers, but I'm waiting to see if William has been able to log in yet. And can anyone tell if he's logged in?
He's not logged in yet, but I am about to email him and see. Wait, somebody has just logged in, hopefully.
William usually has no trouble with Zoom, so I don't quite know what's going on tonight. But I will say that William, as well as Lori Burnside, who is the presidential administrator for Family Process Institute, and I have been meeting regularly over the last year and a half and intermittently with the board to plan this meeting. So there's been a lot of time and thought put into this. We're really excited that you all want to join us and that you all want to learn more about this. Before I get into their formal introductions, I just want to say that William and Marlene have been two of the people who've really inspired me to recognize my white privilege, to recognize the impact of systemic racism on our friends and colleagues in this country, and to inspire me to not only learn more about this, but to try to talk to the white community so that we can help resolve this issue that's been troubling us for 4 or 5 centuries now. They are both wonderful people. William holds a distinguished professorship in leadership and public policy, and he's on the executive leadership team at Lipscomb University on matters of equity, diversity, strategic community engagement. He's trained as a marriage and family therapist. He's had tenured professorships at Vanderbilt University, University of Minnesota, the University of Kentucky. From 2007 to 2009, he worked with then Senator Barack Obama as a Robert Wood Johnson Health Policy Fellow and Legislative Advisor. He's done a lot of amazing research centered on themes related to African American family strengths and the relationship to health and mental health prevention and intervention. He's also worked in his community in Nashville to bring people together to talk about racial issues. Marlene is the former chair of the Couple and Family Therapy Department and a current associate professor in the Department of Counseling and Family Therapy at Drexel University in Philadelphia. She's a licensed couple and family therapist in private practice. She authored the book Facing the Black Shadow. She's currently president of Family Process Institute Board of Directors. She's also on the editorial review board for the Journal of Marital and Family Therapy, Journal of Family Psychotherapy, and Journal of Black Sexuality and Relationships. I will say both of them have warmth and strength and ability to reach across all sorts of divides to pull us together, and I think we're really going to enjoy their presentation tonight. Hopefully we can get William in on the action soon.
Can you all see me?
Yes, you're there, William. Great. You missed your introduction, but you're ready to go.
I heard the whole thing, so
Okay.
I'm fine. Okay, great. So Lori, is this when I share my screen? Uh-oh. Hello?
Sorry, William, I was muted. Yeah, so I think I just stopped sharing, so you can go ahead and share your screen now.
Okay, great. Let's see. Okay, great. So is that working? Laurie, is that working?
I can see it. Can everyone else?
Okay,
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
great. Well, good evening, everybody. Sorry for the little blip at the beginning. I don't usually have very many problems with Zoom, and unfortunately tonight chose to be the time that we were gonna do that. But I'm really excited to be a part of this presentation. As Marianne said, Laurie and she and I have been meeting almost weekly for the last 18 months to plan this conference, including this presentation. And we're really excited that it's beginning tonight and that you're all here and so interested in being a part not only of this presentation, but the whole conference, which I believe will be very life-changing, hopefully, and really enlightening. And so we're really excited about it and glad that you're able and willing to be with us here tonight. And I'm especially excited about sharing this presentation with my dear friend and mentor, Marlene Watson. Marlene has been a dear friend of mine for, I don't want to say how many decades, but she has really been a true mentor and friend. We went to the same graduate school. She was there. As she was graduating, I was starting my Ph.D. program at Virginia Tech. And then I think both she and I were the initial minority fellows for the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. She at the doctoral level and I then at the master's level. And then we both were Robert Wood Johnson Health Policy Fellows. She about 4 years before I was, and then I followed her 4 years later. And once on Family Process, I actually got to be the one to do it first. And so I was on the Family Process Institute board and nominated Marlene to come on board. And I'm really happy that she said yes. And she's been an extraordinary leader for the Institute. Over this past 18 months, there's been so much going on in our world with COVID and with all of the uprisings that surround race and disparities and problems within our nation. And there have been dozens and dozens of books that have been written over the course of that time. But the one that has stood out to me the most and that has had the most powerful impact on me and my thinking and my daily living and the work that I do as a therapist and as a professor and as an administrator has been this book called Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent by Isabelle Wilkerson. And we decided early on in the planning of this conference that we wanted to have some ability to have a discussion about the principles that are laid out in this book and written in such a beautiful and powerful way. Now, when Marlene and I conceived of this session, we thought that at most we'd have maybe 20, 25 people in attendance. And so we weren't anticipating that as many would sign up for it as have signed up for it tonight. We're happy that you're here and we're thrilled that you are here to participate with us in this group, but it changes the dynamics of it a little bit from a conversation to, well, just a bigger conversation. And we decided not to do breakout rooms because neither of us were really that comfortable with doing that. But we will have an opportunity for us to have a discussion. The plan for this evening is for me to spend the first 20 to 30 minutes sort of giving an overview of some of the major tenets of this book. And we assume that many of you, if not most of you, have read the book or at least read some part of it, but we recognize that some of you have not read it. And we wanted to give an overview of some of the major points, major ideas that are put forth, at least from our perspective, on the book. And then we will have an opportunity to engage in some meaningful dialogue, discussion, and address some questions that we have formulated that we believe will help us to think further about this. I think one of the goals of our time tonight is that you leave having been stimulated in your thinking about how to think about race in this country in a way that is that promotes real change. You know, we do a lot of discussions about race, and a lot of the books that have been written talk about things, but they don't give you a lot of necessarily meaningful and powerful advice about what to do or how to make changes. And we hope that out of this conversation and the engagement in this discussion about this powerful book, that you will have, you'll be able to leave with some things to really stimulate your thinking and to launch new actions as we go forward. I want to talk a little bit about Isabelle Wilkerson, who is the writer of this book. She's an American journalist who is the author of her first book, which was called The Warmth of Other Suns, America's Great Migration. And then and that book won the epic story of America's Great Migration. And that book won a Pulitzer Prize. And then her second book is the one that we're going to be discussing tonight, which is called Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent. She is a writer for the New York Times. She's the first African-American woman to win a Pulitzer Prize for journalism. And she is a graduate of Howard University. And Howard has had a tremendous year with just recently acquiring Nicole Hannah-Jones and other luminaries. And our own Marlene Watson is a graduate of Howard University as well. So she's a very talented, wonderful writer, and I think she has the ability to convey very complex and difficult concepts in ways that are very approachable and meaningful and beautifully written. Hold on just a second there. I need to move. Okay, great, got it. So just an overview of the book. In the book Caste, Isabelle Wilkerson argues that life in the United States is defined by a dual-poled caste system in which white people comprise the dominant caste, while Black people comprise the subordinate caste. And throughout the United States history, she suggests that a collective scrambling to get as close to the dominant caste as possible has defined relations among people of different races and ethnicities who've come to the United States in search for better futures. And I think this is a really powerful and salient point of the book. She says that we have these two poles. We have whites as the dominant on one end and Blacks as the most subordinate on the other end, and other groups who come in find their way somewhere in between those. And the goal for most groups is to find a way to be connected more to the dominant group. And that's what a basic premise of her book is about. Okay. Race is the visible agent of caste, while caste is the unseen infrastructure that holds each of America's societies, racial and ethnic groups firmly in their places. And she makes the point that race and caste are intertwined. They are powerfully intertwined, but one is the more sort of visible agent and the other is the more invisible agent, caste. The hierarchy of caste defines every aspect of contemporary American life. And it's why the United States, in spite of its vast wealth and political power, continues to lag in terms of overall happiness, literacy, social programs like universal health care. And in seeking to uphold the dominant caste superiority at every turn, Wilkerson argues that the United States has handicapped itself greatly. And she goes on to use the metaphor of the United States is like an old house. And I think this is a very powerful metaphor that she uses. And unless Americans begin to really examine what it is that keeps that house standing and what problems threaten its structural integrity, they will never be able to repair their country's ills. I want to read a rather long quote from the book, which is on pages 15 and 16 of the hard copy of the book, that reveals this metaphor. And it's a long reading, and I hope you'll bear with me, but I think it is essential that we understand this, or that we be aware of this. And I think it really is what is at the heart of the whole book. So the quote reads, America is an old house. We can never declare the work over. Wind, flood, drought, and human upheavals battle a structure that is already fighting whatever flaws were left unattended in the original foundation. When you live in an old house, you may or you may not want to go into the basement after a storm to see what the rains have wrought. Choose not to look, however, at your own peril. The owner of an old house knows that whatever you are ignoring will never go away. Whatever is lurking will fester, whether you choose to look or not. Ignorance is no protection from the consequences of inaction. Whatever you are wishing away will gnaw at you until you gather the courage to face what you would rather not see. We in the developed world are like homeowners who inherited a house on a piece of land that is beautiful on the outside, but whose soil is unstable loam and rock, heaving and contracting over generations, cracks patched, but the deeper ruptures waved away for decades, centuries even. Many people may rightly say, I had nothing to do with how this all started. I have nothing to do with the sins of the past. My ancestors never attacked indigenous people, never owned slaves, and yes, not one of us was here when this house was built. Our immediate ancestors may have nothing to do with it, but here we are, the current occupants of a property with stress cracks and bowed walls and fissures built into the foundation. We are the heirs to whatever's right or wrong with it. We did not erect or the uneven pillars or joists, but they are ours to deal with now. And any further deterioration is, in fact, on our hands. Unaddressed, the ruptures and diagonal cracks will not fix themselves. The toxins will not go away, but rather will spread and leach and mutate as they already have. When people live in an old house, they come to adjust to the idiosyncrasies and outright danger skulking in an old structure. They put buckets under a wet ceiling, prop up groaning floors, learn to step over that rotting wood tread in the staircase. The awkward becomes acceptable, and the unacceptable becomes merely inconvenient. Live with it long enough, and the unthinkable becomes normal. Exposed over the generations, we learn to believe that the incomprehensible is the way that life is supposed to be. This is a powerful and extraordinary metaphor, I believe, for the country that we live in. And if we think about recent events in our nation's daily living, we think about the events of January 6th, where the unacceptable, where the awkward, where the things that we never thought would be accepted by some people in our society are now accepted. This is really in keeping with what we are experiencing today now. So I think, again, the whole idea that Wilkerson is trying to put forth is that there is a solution to the problem of caste, that caste can change and that caste can be different, but it will not happen very easily. Upper caste individuals must shed the false belief that they are inherently superior or entitled to special privileges and power if we're going to change. Instead, they must work to elevate the voices of those in the subordinate caste. Societies around the world are being held back from progress due to their allegiances to their caste systems. Social programs are suffering, violence rates are increasing, and people are more divided than ever. But with open-hearted attempts to connect to people of other caste and focus on what all humans have in common, society may be able to achieve a world without caste. Only then, Wilkerson suggests, will everyone truly be free. The American caste system is very interesting in its development. Wilkerson sharpens her arguments about the existence of the American caste system by drawing comparisons to the world's most recognizable caste system, the Hindu caste system, which has existed in India for millennia, and the caste system that was manufactured by the Nazi Party during the Third Reich. And while these systems were and are very different from the ones in the United States, every caste is defined by how it forces people to play a role assigned to them at birth. This makes people unable to recognize others' humanity. And once someone has been dehumanized by the caste system, it's easy to continue perpetuating violence and humiliation against them. And I think this is a kind of an explanation for why trained police officers have no hesitancy in treating horribly Black men that they have dehumanized and don't see as their equal or even of their own species. They treat them very differently. And this is all a result of the caste system that we live in the United States. There are many pillars that keep the caste systems intact. The Indian caste system, for instance, posits that the god Brahma created the caste from the different parts of his body. It's rooted in their main religion. And as such, it stays in place. In the American caste system, white European Christians used the biblical story of Noah's curse on the dark-skinned sons of his child Ham to justify enslaving African people. And there are other pillars that uphold caste, which include caste-based violence and terror, caste perceived heritability, and the idea upper caste are inherently pure, while the lower caste are inherently polluted. Caste intrudes, again, on every aspect of our lives, of our daily lives in the United States and in India, in large part because of the urgent necessity of the bottom rung to keep the dominant caste feeling secure in their social positions and their power to influence the world around them. Somebody has to pick up the garbage. Somebody has to do the jobs that nobody else in our society wants to do. And thus we have this caste system that makes it such that those who are in the upper classes don't have to do that, feel justified in not having to do that, and feel like they're doing those who are in the lower caste a favor by giving them something meaningful to do on this earth. This means that members of the subordinate caste will often physically or emotionally harm one another in an effort to get as close to the dominant caste as its attendant privileges as possible. It also means that when the dominant caste power and longevity is threatened, chaos can break loose. Anxieties about losing power are at the heart of caste. Toward the end of the book, Wilkerson seeks to tie upper class anxieties about losing power and authority to the election of Donald Trump in 2016 and to the rise in anti-Black and anti-Semitic and anti-Asian violence, police brutality, and flagrant racism. These phenomena led to violent conflicts like the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. There are great anxieties about losing power. Any change to the script, Wilkerson argues, leads to a sharp resurgence of caste. So the presidency of Barack Obama, a Black politician, was a major deviation in the centuries-long script where the dominant caste was able to punish, humiliate, brutalize, and murder the subordinate caste with impunity. Now we have the leader of our nation and the leader of the free world who happens to be a Black person from the lowest level of the caste, and that has changed the script drastically and has led to a different kind of behavior that has been there to reinforce the caste system. Again, the only solution to the problem of caste, Wilkerson argues, is a collective societal effort across the spectrum of the caste system. That those who have power have to have a willingness to give that up, to recognize their privilege and the power that they have, and to share that with those who don't. Upper class individuals must shed the false belief that they are inherently superior or entitled to special privileges and power. Again, the only true solution of caste is that truth. Instead, they must work to elevate the voices of those in the subordinate castes. Societies around the world are being held back from progress due to their allegiances to their caste systems. Social programs are suffering, violence rates are increasing, and people are more divided than ever. But with open-hearted attempts to connect to people of other castes and focus on what all humans have in common, society may be able to achieve a world without caste. Only then, Wilkerson suggests, will everyone truly be free. The book advances four major themes. There are several other themes, but there are four major themes that I think are advanced in this book. The first one is the idea that caste, race, and social divisions in the United States exist. And she does a really good and elaborate job of expounding on that. She also talks about caste as a global problem. It's not merely something that happens here in the United States or even in India or in the Third Reich Germany, but it happens across the world. And one of the goals of this book is to help us to develop not only a language to talk about this, but a way of understanding and seeing that problem as it exists in other parts of the world. And then she also talks about the ways in which caste sustains itself. And then finally, what the cost of caste are. And I'll just elaborate on each of these just a little bit. Throughout the book Caste, Wilkerson argues that the United States has always structured its society around a polarized caste system. Nobody talks about that in that way overtly, but it's always been structured that way. And she goes back and does a deep dive historically about how that happened from the time that particularly Black people came to the American continent on 1619 to the present day. A caste system, again, is a social hierarchy created on the basis of characteristics like race and religion, in which dominant caste controls the subordinate ones. And while the word caste is most commonly associated, again, with the caste system in India, the book suggests that the United States has its own caste system that divides citizens based on rigid, arbitrary boundaries centered on race. On the United States caste system, white people make up the dominant caste and Black people make up the subordinate one. Race and caste are both social constructs, but Wilkerson describes race as the visible skin of social hierarchy in the United States, while caste is the invisible skeleton. And the book argues that present-day divisions in the United States along social, political, and economic lines are all rooted in American society's allegiance to its race-based caste system. Even today, the book suggests caste continues to define how US society functions. Members of the subordinate caste are more likely to face health problems brought on by the stresses of the dehumanizing caste system. And this really reflects the theme of our conference. We're talking about COVID-19 and the intersection of that and race and other social stressors. And we see that especially now in the time of COVID, but this has been a truth for decades, if not centuries, here in the United States. For instance, in the United States, Black people suffer from higher rates of high blood pressure and diabetes, conditions associated with elevated levels of stress hormones. The dominant caste fear of losing power in society dictates the United States political climate at any given moment. And for example, Wilkerson argues that the 2016 presidential election, celebrity billionaire Donald Trump defeated Hillary Clinton by appealing to a white voter base who feared losing power following the presidency of Barack Obama, a Black man. And even basic everyday interactions like dining in a restaurant or seeking help with home repairs or traveling on transportation are defined by caste-based power struggles. Marlene and I were talking the other day as we were sort of going through this presentation, and we found ourselves for an additional hour just talking about our own personal experiences with this, how things that happen in our everyday lives are a result of us being African Americans in a world that is dominated by white people. And I'm sure there are many of you on this call who could relay similar kinds of stories about things that happen to you on a daily basis. But caste is something that's at work in our lives every day. In the book Caste, Isabelle Wilkerson, who is Black, recalls an instance when she and a white friend experienced terrible service while dining in a restaurant. Her friend was enraged to realize that the way the staff was treating them compared to other tables of white diners was due to Wilkerson's subordinate caste position. But Wilkerson thought that if I responded like that every time I was slighted, I'd be telling someone off almost every day, making it clear that caste severely impacts her everyday experience as a Black woman. We have to recognize that caste cannot be mended without the sort of realizations that we've been talking about. What Wilkerson calls the radicalization of the dominant caste is the first step to getting rid of the caste system in the United States. White Americans who need to acknowledge the caste system and advocate for the subordinate caste. And by recognizing with the truth about what the United States was founded on, that is to say, a system that subordinates anyone who is white, more and more upper class people might be inspired to speak and to act against the American caste system. And one of the things that has been really exciting and wonderful to me in the past 18 months is I have so many of my white colleagues and allies who I believe are really starting to wrestle with this and grapple with these realities and are really digging deep to make the kinds of changes that they personally need to make, and that will help our world to be a better place. And I'm really grateful for people who are taking that that action. What will ultimately dismantle caste, the book suggests, is people's capacity to responsibly educate themselves about caste and to work to dismantle it through interpersonal connections. This is very similar to what Kendi talks about in How to Be an Anti-Racist. Being an anti-racist is really about educating yourself about racism and the problems that exist in the world, and then how do you go about changing and making the changes that need to be made. For instance, Isabelle Wilkerson speaks of how she got through to an aloof white plumber who came to her house, connecting with him by confiding him about a recent loss of her mother, which led him to open up about the loss of his own mother. So I think it's that human connection. Brian Stevenson, in his book, Just Mercy, talks about proximity to people, being able to be proximate with people, being close to people, being able to have meaningful conversation with people, and that helps us to connect on a human level. I think that that's what Wilkerson is reflecting there in this book. The artificial divisions that have defined the United States society, politics, and economy keep people from true freedom. But by recognizing, rejecting, and replacing caste with empathy and advocacy, the United States might be able to create a society in which everyone is truly free. The second theme is caste as a global problem. And while the concept of the caste system or social hierarchy may be most closely linked with the Hindu caste system in India, caste systems exist around the world. As early as 1916, American eugenicists pointed to the caste system in India as the inspiration for and parallel to Jim Crow or racial segregation laws in the United States, southern states. They were learning from the caste system in India. And in 1934, and this to me was one of the most insightful parts of this book. I did not know this prior to reading this book. In 1934, when the leaders of the Nazi Party gathered in Berlin to begin drafting the Nuremberg laws, the codes that they would use to dehumanize Jewish people and exclude them from participating in society, they turned to those same Jim Crow laws for guidance, for implementing a rigid, arbitrary hierarchy in their society. Caste arbitrary divisions affect societies around the world, dehumanizing and subordinating many different groups of people. So the Nazis in Germany used the Jim Crow South as a model for how to structure their society. That was enlightening to me. And as such, Wilkerson argues that caste is a global problem, one that must be carefully, systematically dismantled if global society is to flourish. Theme 3, how caste sustains itself. Wilkerson points to the many examples of how caste systems around the world place people in a social hierarchy based on arbitrary categories and to keep themselves going. So it might be about skin color. It might be about height. It might be about eye color. It might be about, whatever. But they're arbitrary and they are meaningless except for the construction that we have made of them socially to maintain these castes. These examples include scapegoating or dehumanizing people in subordinate caste, the lowest categories, as well as suppressing them through police brutality and cruel cultural stereotypes and narratives shown in media. And moreover, those in subordinate caste are given very limited opportunities to escape their stations. The book suggests that caste is a phenomenon of madness that echoes through every level of global society, engineered by a dominant caste seeking to sustain its power at all cost. And the final theme is the cost of caste. All of global society, Wilkerson caste suggests, pays a price for a caste system, a social hierarchy that ranks people based on fixed arbitrary categories that rewards few while punishing many. The book suggests that the United States in particular suffers because of its allegiance to a rigid caste system, resulting in an accurate and inaccurate understanding of their country's history and unequal access to things like healthcare and education. And by pointing out how societies around the world are hindered by their devotion to caste, the book suggests that members of the dominant caste will often act and vote against their own interest, no matter the cost, if it means upholding the caste system that gives them a sense of worth, power, and dominance. So that is an overview. This is a powerful book. I touched on many of the major ideas and themes, but there's so many, many more that we could talk about. And in the second part of our presentation, that I'm going to turn over to Marlene, we're going to engage in some discussion and some questions that we have prepared for the discussion tonight.
Thank you, William. Thank you for that very comprehensive overview of the book Caste. Good evening to everyone. There are two prevailing ideas that I would like to have you reflect on, to think about. And as you know and have heard, caste is about power, who has it and who doesn't. The issue, however, is that we think of intersectionality as somehow mediating caste, and it does not. And so there are many white people who think that because they came from a lower class, that they do not have power. And I think if we're going to dismantle the caste system, then every single white person must realize that they have power, and not just think about those who are in the higher positions of power, but that every single white person is in that dominant caste and therefore has power. The other idea that I'd like to share with you is that for people of color and for Black people who have for years attempted to make ourselves more acceptable to white people by trying to be more identified with whites, that in a racial caste system, your station is fixed, rigid, and no matter what you do, it is not going to move you up. That this is a challenge and work for all of us. And so it's important for us to think about that, regardless of where you're situated in terms of your profession. We need to think about that. As family therapists, I think sometimes we give families the impression, families of color, that if they only did certain things, they might be able to escape the racial caste system in the United States. And that just isn't the way that this works. So that's something that I think is critical for us to think about, and to think about how we use intersectionality and what message we may be giving to the families that we work with. The rigid caste system really does impact how we are treated by the very nation that we are part of. Some of the things that we thought we would come up with in terms of questions to guide the conversation. Now, these are just questions to guide the conversation. They do not have to be questions that you really want to focus on, but we want you to engage in a conversation, and so you have flexibility there. But one of the things that was very striking to me in the book is that Germany, unlike the United States, has been able to enforce laws and policies and make clear its condemnation of white supremacy. And it's sort of very interesting that the United States really hasn't been able to do that. And so it brings up the question of how do we in our professional roles unwittingly contribute to maintaining systems of racial dominance? That's one of the questions. Another question is, what are the ways that COVID brought the United States racial caste system clearer into view? And what role do our journals, Family Process and other journals, have in dismantling racism? And one of the most poignant things that I read in the book was when Wilkerson stated, the dominant caste system can sit back and do nothing while evil prevails. So wondering, how do you understand this statement, and what does it mean for you and your efforts toward anti-racism? Thinking about where you sit in this racial caste system and what your professional role is, and how you work within that professional role to address issues of racism. So those are some guiding questions, but I think it's really important for us to get into the discussion. And so I'm going to invite you to join in the discussion. As I said, you can use these questions, or if you have someplace else you want to go based on where you are, please feel free to do that. I don't care which question, if you want to use them, you start with, as long as we get started with the discussion.
So for those who want to join in, there's a lot of us on this call, but maybe type something right quickly in the chat, and then turn on your video, and then we will know that you are weighing in on the discussion. And you all signed up for a talk tonight that was called a discussion on the bookcast. So I encourage you all to step forward. Martha, did you want to join in on the conversation? Did you have a thought or question or?
Laurie, I think, excuse me, I think that Jay wanted to know if we can all turn on our videos, and it seems that we have less people than we anticipated. And so I'm wondering if we might be able to turn it on and to remove the slides.
Well, I think we could certainly try that. If things start to crash, then we should all shut our videos off really quickly.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. So I should stop the sharing?
Yes, why don't you take that down?
Something.
I did.
And I did put the questions up in the chat. So if any of you need to refresh the questions that Marlene had up there, you can look into the chat for that.
So, did you put in?
So this is Roberta. I don't mind sharing, but I do not want to turn on my camera because I just came back from working out.
Understood, Roberta.
So my camera's not coming on.
Understood.
However, the first question that Dr. Watson posed is something I have actually thought about as well. I haven't had an opportunity to travel to Germany yet, but in speaking with others, I think about that because even there, my understanding is they don't hide the historical part of what they did with the Jewish population. And we can't even reckon and speak about slavery in the United States. So I think it's such the violence and brutality that was continues to be, but even the origins of it, I just think is so different in the United States. Not that violence and oppression hasn't occurred in other places. I just think the brutality of what has occurred from the origins of the United States is so different, and it has never been recognized or acknowledged. Again, we're going through so much of the battle now, even with the 1619 Project and all of the laws and politicians and the uproar about what can and cannot be taught. What is the fear of teaching what has actually occurred? And it's really propelling, wanting to cement that one narrative so that there is ignorance and invisibility and lack of insight and no critical thinking or questioning about what is. So I just think we are just a different species here than in other countries. And as you identified, in Germany, it's, I actually have thought of that same question. And I think that's because that has led us to the situation that we're in right now, right? They have learned some things. I'm not saying Germany's perfect, but there's an acknowledgement there. And I don't think you can even start any type of healing process without even acknowledging what has happened. So, it's sad, but it's something we do have to address in the sense of educating ourselves and then taking action, and very comparably to what William was talking about as it relates to that house, right? We may not have done it, but it's ours. So how are we going to fix it? Or in which way are we going to continue to let it crumble? We have a stake in the game, is what I'm saying. Even if you didn't start it, it's ours. We are a part owner of it. So I didn't give an answer, but those are some thoughts.
Thank you, Roberta. Those are very important, things to contemplate. But there is that narrative that we are wedded to, and we see the fight that's going on now, as you said, in Congress, not wanting critical race theory to be taught, not wanting the 1619 Project to come to light, those kinds of things. Going a bit further, it's always interesting to me each year that some official goes to Germany, and I'm not suggesting by any means that it should not be done, to acknowledge what was done in Germany, the Holocaust, but yet I have not seen any go to plantations and honor what was done here in this land.
Yeah.
And I just want to add one more thing, and then I'm going to stop taking up airspace. What I also find interesting, because I try and sort of not take things at face value, I'll even look at advertisements when you're looking in Louisiana and different places down south. They use plantations as vacation spots.
Yeah.
They use them as holding weddings, right? And they, even when pictures or figures are put up, they're having Black people smiling. Oh, it wasn't that bad. So even how things are illustrated in that way and how they use that space and talk about that space, to me, is alarming.
Very alarming. I was at the Whitney Plantation in Louisiana, And on the tour was a white woman who really took, offense and opposed what the tour guide was saying. And for her evidence, she said that some Black person had told her that Black people were living in trees in Africa. And so it had been a saving measure, bringing them to the United States as slaves, despite all the things that were there that spoke to the horrors of slavery. All the stories, the testimonies, and there's something that really gets in the way of white people. And I think in terms of Black people, if a Black person really told her that it's that internalized racism that then, or either that desire to placate a white person and agree, that yes, this happened, whether they truly believe it or not.
I think one of the issues of the differences between Germany and the United States is that is history. Germany had to face their sins, if you will, the problems that they had created immediately. The rest of the world held their feet to the fire. And I don't think that happened in the United States. We figured out a way to put it off. And so either you pay now or you pay later. And as a nation, rather than saying after the Civil War that we're going to end all of this, we try to, as a nation, placate the South by allowing them a narrative that said, well, they were of a noble cause, they just lost. And it was nothing noble about what they did, but that was the sort of message that got across. And so particularly here in the South, you have all of these sort of artifacts of antebellum South that are celebrated. There's a campus here in Nashville called Belmont University. It's a very lovely liberal arts university. And in the center of the Belmont campus is the Belmont Mansion and the slave quarters that the slaves lived in. And the official narrative of the university is, well, we didn't really have slaves, or the slaves that they loved living there. They didn't have to do the stuff that everybody else did. Well, of course, that's a bunch of hooey, but that's the story that in 2021, they tell parents and their children as they are touring the campus thinking about going to school there. There's so many plantations here in Nashville that I couldn't even begin to tell you. I walk in a park every day, the Ravenswood Mansion that holds weddings. It's a beautiful, lovely location. That was a plantation that had slaves. You still see the slave quarters there. It's just all over the place where people have not owned the problems that created all of that kind of system, and have spent years just trying to figure out a way to whitewash it and make it better. Last week, a bust was removed from the Tennessee state capitol of Bedford, Nathaniel Bedford Forrest. He was the founder of the Ku Klux Klan, and his bust was on display in the Capitol of Tennessee in Nashville. And there was a big debate about it that had gone on for decades. And finally, after George Floyd was killed, they decided to have a real serious conversation about it. And the legislature voted not to move it. But our governor, surprisingly, who never goes against the legislature, decided that he would move it out of the Capitol to the State Museum. So it's still in a place where it's seen and revered. But it's that kind of thing where we don't deal with, we put off the dealing with the real problem, hoping that it will go away, or that those who don't want to make those kind of changes will continue to have their points of view out there for everyone to embrace.
Art, were you about to say something earlier?
Yes, yes. I didn't realize I was muted, so sorry about that. I really wanted to thank you both for presenting. I was not familiar with this book. I already ordered it, so I can't wait to read it. But I want to just really agree with those who have spoken before. Our nation is not in a place of even beginning to confront this issue. And, I wasn't aware of that progress in Germany, but I've often thought about South Africa and apartheid and how I believe that they are going to be so far ahead of us because they've even moved to, because of Mandela's leadership, a process of reconciliation, right? You can't reconcile something that you haven't first confronted, right? And I think that what gets in the way, there are probably many things, economics and so forth, that get in the way of us confronting racism in this country. But one of them that I think is very powerful is not just that we don't want to own that true narrative, but we have competing narratives that are very powerful. So we're freedom fighters, we save democracy, for the world. I mean, we have all of this stuff, right? And it's very, very powerful. And if you can't pierce that, you can't get to the other layer of the realities, of racism. So, I think your question about, as family therapists, what can we do and what can the journal do? And sadly, I think, we're at a place where we just have to get people to talk about race and racism. We're still at that point. At my hospital center, that's where I am with people, and in social work, we have the axiom, start where the client is at, right? So I have to start where people are at. It's very difficult for people to just talk about, just have a conversation. And we do all of these things to make a safe space for people and all of this. Very hard for people to just talk about it, And I remind the staff that it's a privilege to be able to feel that something is difficult to talk about, because the patients that we're treating every day, they don't have that privilege. They live it, and they feel it, and it's impacting their lives. So we need to get over, our discomfort about having these conversations, because other people's lives depend on us being able to change things. So, and I try to make the connection between issues of race and, the treatment plan, right? So, we're all focused on the treatment plan, but somehow that's somewhere else in our brain from race and racism. But we need to be asking the question of how, for, people of color, how has oppression and racism impacted this person's life, and where are the treatment goals that reflect that? So, of course, that's kind of light years away for people who are still trying to just be in a room with people and talk about race and racism. But I think that's where we are.
Yes. Thank you, Martha. Art?
Yeah, so I really enjoyed William's summary. I thought he did a masterful job. I really liked the book. I was especially taken by the metaphor of the house also before you did it tonight. And I think it's terrific for a couple of reasons. I mean, I do think it allows white guys like me to be part of the problem without feeling so guilty, or without just dodging it by saying, look, I didn't own slaves, or I'm trying not to be prejudiced. I'm trying not to be like the people that are overtly racist. I do think that's a distinction that's worth making. I think the other point you made that she does is that goes with the house is the cost to all of us. I loved your slide. I mean, she doesn't have of the house that's falling apart, and it's going to get worse if we don't do something. And so I think that is also a very appealing argument to everybody. We all have to get behind this. I do have a question for everybody that that relates to this issue of what's the difference, but is caste, you know, she's the one that makes this metaphor come alive, and with the comparisons to Nazi Germany and India. And it's obvious that this is a thing that you're born with. You can't escape it. But how do people differentiate that from racism or systemic racism? Is caste preferable? I mean, in some ways, that's what I felt reading the book, is I feel like in some ways it, you know, helps us, but is something lost? You know, is something lost if you just see this all as a monolithic caste problem versus all the issues of systemic racism, and even differentiating people who are overtly racist and as a way to build their self-esteem and whatever. So I'm curious what people think about that.
Manager, did you?
Yeah, if I may, thank you so much, Art, for bringing this up. I have a major issue with this book, and it became so famous so fast because people can connect with the idea of caste in Indian system and all of that. And so what it gets lost is the unique position that the United States of America has in the world in terms of the greatest nation, number one, and how uniquely positioned as the superpower around the globe. So what happens when we talk about this idea of caste and caste system and Nazi Germany, it actually says, you know what, this is human. This is what has happened in other places. And so it's happening in the United States as well, which I think is very dangerous. And it really gets people to see this as a human issue. And like you said, people are born into a caste system. And by the way, it was kept by the British 200 years of colonizations, that they kept it. And not only they kept it, they reinforced it and put people in places so they can actually continue. And they said that they couldn't have been able to colonize as long as they did if they didn't keep the caste system. So aside from that, the United States position in terms of the genocide of natives of this country, and then bringing Africans to this continent and enslaving them, it's so incredibly unique. Then we have Chinese exclusion acts. Then we have the internment camps of Japanese. I mean, it's just one after another. And so this book, as wonderful as it is, it actually creates another problem, yet another problem in the system. And I think that's why it became so famous, because people just love it. Yeah, see, this is human nature. This is not something that uniquely happens in the US. So I think if we want to get beyond what has happened globally, and if we want to continue to be the leader of, be the greatest nation, be the biggest democracy on planet, then we need to take a look at United States of America and only United States of America, and start from the genocides of indigenous people, and then continue and come along and look at all different groups that have been enslaved by the system. Maybe then we can be in a better place.
Thank you, Manager.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was there someone who wanted to speak?
Jay.
Jay.
I just want to free associate to what Manager is talking about, not particularly in terms of the book, but you know, we have this bad history, right? I mean, it's a bad and special history, and we struggle with it. I'm talking Americans struggle with it in a range of ways, right? I am free enough that I cannot have a vaccine, even if it's going to kill you, is a belief we carry around, right? I mean, Americans carry around. And I always think of that old Bob Dylan song, which I'm not going to be able to quote correctly, Only a Pawn in Their Game. It's about the killing of Medgar Evers. And who actually killed him? The guy who shot the gun? Rupert Murdoch lives in Australia okay, to mix my metaphors here, whatever, because I was accenting our American responsibility, but he lives in Australia. He has more of an effect on all of this than anybody else in the world. I believe that's true. You could tell me somebody else maybe might be close, right? So this gets to be this thing. I'm sorry, I'm getting all this free association, so I probably may sound a bit leaping around, but you know, we invented eugenics. We have a thing, journal things, we have a thing called evolutionary psychology. You ever read any of that? We get papers from evolutionary psychology. You have to watch them because they're about, you know, how our genes make us different. Okay, not a terrible idea to start with, right? But on the other hand, easily transformed into something that goes right back into caste, right? So, so these are all, you know, that the last thought is about how editors have to consider this moral dimension in considering papers, because if they get into the literature, yeah, it's you know, then it becomes you know, eugenics started in the United States. The Germans perfected it, studied the American eugenicists and perfected their techniques. And as other people are saying, I mean, the Germans have a very strong moral stance about that. Top down, it isn't just they're good people. Top down, they go to jail if they invoke certain things. So I don't know what the answer is, because we live in a society where, you know, there's free speech and a whole bunch of things. So I don't want to make that sound simple, but this gets really complicated in terms of preserving this belief system, right? They would not, you know, if you go to Berlin, they're I'm sorry for going on so long, but they're everywhere. They put up memorials everywhere, so you cannot walk anywhere in Berlin, go more than a couple of blocks without running into some memorial that reminds you about what we did. So again, sorry for going on.
Thanks, Jay. Mana Jay, I want to appreciate what you had to say, and I will certainly reflect on that a lot more. But I also want to say that I did not come away from the book thinking that at all, okay, that these other examples were sort of used to humanize the United States. Okay. I thought of it more as like some of these other places that have caste, that we need to recognize that the United States has this fixed, rigid system where no matter what you do, you're going to remain in that particular position that you were born in. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if that was
appreciated
more me from the lens of my racial identity or not, but I really didn't come away with that. But I'm going to reflect on what you said, and I don't think that I will see it that way, but I certainly agree with your point that the United States is not blameless and needs to be held accountable for itself. And that was sort of the point I was making about, I don't see them going to plantations that, you know, they go around the world, you know, to acknowledge the Holocaust that took place in Germany, and that's part of the narrative. Look at us, we're going because, you know, this is something abhorrent. And yet you don't deal with what has happened here on this soil. So I just wanted to share that, but also to tell you that, you know, I appreciate what you had to say, and we'll certainly reflect on that a bit more.
just want to add one, appreciated that, Marlene. So if we, as anthropologists, if we think about the emic and ethic perspective, I think those of you that have been born in the United States of America have the emic perspective. You are insiders, regardless of your racial backgrounds. I, on the other hand, have the ethic perspective because I was born outside of this country and I've been involved in looking in and seeing these kinds of discourses when it happens. And then it's like this system and that system get compared. How it's being perceived is so much part of that internalized racism that everybody is just not even conscious that we see it. So as an outsider looking in, I'm looking at this book and going, yeah, why this book became so famous, and it makes so much sense to everyone. Not the whole thing, but part of it is about that humanizing, like human does this, we need to take care of it. And it's a powerful book. There is no way to deny it. It's just that emic ethic perspective. So I appreciate you actually making this clarification for me as well.
Can I make a synthetic?
for me.
Go ahead. Yeah. So can I make one synthetic comment? So I also felt the book was really moving, and not just saying this is all fine and just because it's around the world, but like Marlene. But I thought your comment, manager, answers partly the question, why are we different from Germany? Because I think in America, the narrative of what America is threatened.
Mm-hmm.
And we're much worse even than systemic racism. We have this idea, America the best. And so you were talking about that. We're the strongest, we're the big butt kicker. We can have nuclear weapons, but Iran can't. You know, how dare they have nuclear weapons? And we've interfered all over the world, including in Iraq. We killed our native people. We have interfered in in Latin America over and over. We interned the Japanese. We've done all sorts of stuff, and we maintain our view as we're the great guys from World War II. You know, we stopped the Nazis. And I think Trump, you know, who holds himself literally envelops himself in the flag, you know, how dare you threaten the flag? You know, there's something then in the American identity that is threatened by acknowledging any of this stuff that may be even worse than in other countries. You know, we are America the best. How can you say we're not?
Mm-hmm.
And that trumps, I hate to use that word anymore, but that beats everything. That beats economics or, you know, anything. And we are this, we're the place where all the immigrants can come. And the other myth is you can work if you work hard, you can make it. And obviously some people did. My great grandfather came here, didn't speak English, didn't have any money, rose to come out of a corporation. But, you know, if you're Black, no, that is a really challenging deal, and there are people stepping on your throat, like Lyndon Johnson said. So I think maybe that's where it's bigger. And I like what you said then about why we're not just like everybody else.
You know,
I think we also have Dr. Wombolt, Marianne Wombolt has had her hand raised to weigh in there as well. And I see that Carmen also has her hand raised, perhaps to get in on the conversation. So maybe we could start with Marianne.
Yeah, I've been appreciating all of this discussion. It's really rich and it's really important. I think as a white person who was oblivious to white privilege for a long time growing up in this country, the notion that we live in a caste system makes it more palatable for people like me to start looking at these issues. That when I talk to white people in my family, to bring up that we're all racist turns them off immediately. They get this physiologic response, and they don't think they're a racist because they don't do these bad things, and the conversation stops. So I think the brilliance of this book is saying we're all in this house together, but we all swim in this system of caste that you can become conscious of. And then you don't have to blame yourself. You can just say, all right, this is the system we're growing up in. What do we want to do to change it? So I think that metaphor is actually a way to open the door to
Yeah.
more people of privilege in this country to start looking at these issues.
Good. So this is Fred Wambolt, Marianne sharing the platform with me as well. And I have a thought about the difference between us and Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany and Nazi Italy were thoroughly defeated. Hitler killed himself in a bunker. Mussolini was hung. After the Civil War was over, there was this nice gentleman agreement between white people that this would go on, and very quickly Reconstruction came, so that when I was marching with black folks in the 60s for civil rights, blacks were still being lynched. Blacks were still being hung up on the sycamore trees. Well, sorry, Marianne, but I mean, I'm passionate about this because I think we have to realize that the whites in the South won the war, but also the North collaborated with them in this. I mean, Reconstruction made a nice deal with the Southerners. And the last thing I just want to say that I thought was really wonderful in the book Caste was she brings up what has been the worst single thing that I've seen in recent political television, which was during Barack Obama's State of the Union address. He said something, and an unknown person who happened to be in Congress kept standing up and saying, "You lie, you lie." And I had never heard that over the years. And that convinced me at that time that there is a caste system and that whites can put their thumbs on black people's heads and try to press them down. And for me, that has been quite a learning experience.
Thanks, Fred. Carmen, and then
Actually, Carmen and Kathy, but I think I also have a request, not from you, Kenya, but from somebody else, Kenya Beard, who thought that you had your hand up and you had something to say. I know earlier you had your hand up and then you said that you'd put it in the chat, but did you have some other comment that you wanted to share with us before we move on?
No, I put it in the chat box. The only thing I want to add is that I really appreciate the diverse perspectives on this call tonight and the way everyone is responding to the different perspectives. It's very encouraging.
Thank you. So then we'll go to Carmen and then maybe to Kathy. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but I hope I am.
And also Christina.
Is Christina, and also Christina. I didn't see her hand, I didn't see her chat, but yes.
Carmen,
Carmen, you're muted.
I'm responding to, from my position, especially, I teach in a very liberal program where most of our students are white, or a lot of them are white passing. They've at least come to recognize that the privilege that comes with that. And my comments are fairly similar to what Marianne and Fred were saying, but I'm struck with several things. One is when you said, Marlene, that intersectionality doesn't mediate caste. I mean, that's a really helpful piece for me to remember as I try to figure how do we work with these things clinically. But where I'm struggling or thinking about is even the context of the dominant caste, the dominant culture, this language of individualism and the whole issue around racism.
Yeah.
It's like and the resistance right now to teaching anything about critical anything that they're calling critical race theory,
Like this.
which is basically teaching that there is such a thing as infrastructure.
Yeah.
Whether we call it caste or infrastructure or the skeleton of the house. And it's and so it is a lot better if we can take it away from if there's some way we can look at what that structure is. And where I get stuck and where I see my students like over the course of a 3-year program evolving is moving to see that there is such a thing as structure, let alone infrastructure. And this is a family therapy program. And so in a society where part of the initial story, besides, you know, American exceptionalism, is about individualism somehow.
Right.
It just makes me feel stuck. And I guess I say that knowing also what you started with, which is this infrastructure has to be fixed by those of us who are in the dominant caste. And I think I'm just expressing my frustration of how hard it is to even have a language. You know, Fricker talks about hermeneutic injustice. And it's like there's not even a language that people can really agree on for how to talk about racial issues or and a lot of different things. And so I want to be hopeful, but that's where I'm stuck. So thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. I think we had Kathy next. Am I saying your name correctly?
You know, it's interesting. My name is Kata, and I'm named after a German artist, Kata Kollwitz, who was an anti-war activist. And so, you know, maybe having that name had something to do with how much time I've spent studying Germany, both after the First and the Second World War. I have a slightly different perspective. I agree with Jay. Walking around Berlin is an incredibly moving experience, Jewish person or not, in the ability of the city to memorialize and recognize and acknowledge what happened there, and their plaques, you know, as he says, you know, every few feet, basically saying a Jew lived here and was murdered in Auschwitz or whatever. However, I don't valorize the Germans. First of all, they took a very long time after World War II, and economic sanctions were part of what moved them to take the stand that they did. And they've actually been terrible towards the Turkish immigrants who've come and other immigrants who have. And white supremacy, in my view, is alive and well in Germany. It's just not directed at Jews who actually are moving back into Germany and Berlin. So that's just about Germany. But I think there was a point that was made earlier about the, I sort of did a double take, and then I agreed with it that the South didn't really quite lose the war.
Yeah.
And, you know, that there's a difference between, you know, losing a war and the economic sanctions. I mean, the South has continued to do very, very well. I think, you know, COVID, just to kind of circle back to one of the points, Marlene, that you raised in the discussion question, you know, we are seeing some of the downside of Southern beliefs in rates of COVID and deaths related to COVID. And then just one last, you know, observation. I really want to circle back, Kenya, to your point and say also that I've been very kind of opened and touched by the diversity of opinion in the call, and also the way difference of opinion has been observed and handled. And I feel like I've learned something about that, and I am very much appreciative of that. Thank you.
And then Christina, did you have something also? I didn't see your hand raised, but did you have something also?
Yeah, thank you, Lori. So, gosh, there's so many wonderful points that I want to respond to, but what's been rising to the surface for me is just that part of what seems so sinister about the way the caste system or white supremacy or systemic racism, however we want to name it and frame it, part of what's so sinister is that it is its invisibility to the dominant caste. And I so appreciate what Manija said about looking in from the outside. And I suspect that this system has always been glaringly clear to anyone outside and also to anyone who's not part of the dominant caste, right? We need to, as a white person, you know, just having the discussion, learning, talking about it, engaging with it is really helpful. And I so appreciate Martha's contribution that we, as therapists or as clinicians or as practitioners, having the conversation and directly engaging, whatever the framing we're using, is valuable and is important. And I'm a brand new family therapist, and I'm so encouraged that many of my professors are really encouraging myself and my peers as new therapists to broach conversations of identity and of power in the therapy room, and do it directly and do it with humility, but respect that, you know, as a therapist, I have some expertise, but I'm not the expert in anyone else's story. And I need to, well, we all need to be very aware of who gets to tell the story. And this, you know, it's true of American history, it's true of world history, but it's true in a family system, and it's true in society, that we need to pay close attention to who we're giving voice to and who we're lifting up. And I'm really grateful for our presenters. Thank you so much for facilitating this discussion and fostering this debate, because it does seem that as part of the dominant caste, talking about any problems is taboo, and that reinforces the silence, that reinforces all the sinister nature of it, and we can't get anywhere unless we are talking about it. The metaphor for any other Harry Potter fans out there is that Voldemort was the bad guy, and he had his power because people weren't supposed to name his name. And we got to say the name Voldemort. And so I haven't yet had the chance to read the book Caste, but I love this new frame, and I'm happy to learn about it. So I'll pause it there. Thank you.
You're muted, Marlene.
Sorry. Thanks to everyone for sharing your perspectives. And I want to say that I am taking away things that have been said as well. I looked at Germany and thought specifically about the Jewish people and what was being done, and wasn't thinking about what may be done to others now. And so that has really expanded my view. You know, I mean, I still think the question, you know, they don't need to be valorized, but I still think the question of why can't we move, you know, more toward enforcing the laws that we have on the books, and, you know, condemning white supremacy. So I just wanted to say that thank you for that. I certainly appreciate that, and appreciate everyone's view. And importantly, none of us may have the answer, but if we stay engaged and keep the conversation, maybe together we can evolve to that place where things are better. So William?
I just want to say thank you so much for the rich conversation that we've had here tonight. This is really what we were hoping for, and really appreciate the things that you're sharing. And there have been ideas that have been presented here that certainly have challenged my thinking in many respects. At the end of the day, I think that what Wilkerson was trying to do with his book, and I think it's been very effective, is to speak to the matters of caste as it really truly is a human problem. It's a universal problem, but it's manifested differently within each society, within each culture. And she makes a really strong point about that in the book. I don't think she's trying to narrow it to just one perspective. And but it gives us a frame to think about and talk about these kinds of matters. I think for as a person of color, particularly a person in the United States who's in the who was born into the lowest caste, I read this and I find it terribly enlightening and freeing and refreshing, because it gives me a different way of thinking about, in a different language, to understand the issues that surround me every single day. And I think it gives us a different way of thinking about or speaking about racism that on one level can be a bit disarming, and on another level, it's kind of, oh, I got you now that you have really understood fully what it is that she's trying to say. So I think it's very powerful in that way. And I think, again, as we came together tonight, we weren't necessarily thinking that we would leave with a lot of answers, but that we would leave with some ammunition about how to go about and get answers, and to have deeper conversations about that. And I just really appreciate you all for being here, for listening intently, but most especially for sharing your thoughts and views on the way that this discussion has made you think. So thank you so much.
Thanks,
And
everybody.
Yeah, I think our time is up, right?
Well done. Well done, everyone.
Yeah.
And we look forward to seeing all of you, or most of you, in Washington, D.C. on the 23rd of September.
Sounds great.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Lori.
Good night.
Good night.
Everybody, bye.